What's up, guys? Steven Spikes here at the Spike Signal, and today I'm going to be talking about the solo in the Omnium Gatherum song Ego. I talked about the full song last week, and now I'm going to be finishing it up with the solo, and that's coming up right now here on the Spike Signal. So I wanted to divide up the solo from the rest of the song on account of the fact that solos typically have a lot of stuff from a standpoint of music theory going on in them, into the point that it almost can be viewed like, not like an entire song in and of itself in a listenable sense, but to a point where there's so much to discuss to really break everything down thoroughly. It really warrants its own video. So let's go ahead and get right into it and start breaking down very sort of succinctly and clearly what's happening here. Now, if we pick up from where we left off last time, we would have left out in the key of C sharp minor. That's where the majority of the song is. Even though there's lots of key changes throughout various bits of the song, C sharp minor is where the majority takes place, and we're coming from C sharp minor into this part of the solo. Now, the solo actually shifts keys up just like other parts in the song, and that gives it a really sort of unique sound and unique section of the song in terms of just kind of like how it feels. You know, it fully kind of transitions you out of a more rhythmic vocal rhythm guitar centric feel into something that truly is the solo in and of itself just by doing a key change. So let's go ahead and look closely at what's going on here and listen to it. I'm going to play it from a couple measures back so we hear the transition into the solo right here, and I'll actually even move back some. I'm going to play it from the section of the sort of part of the solo that's in C minor, and we're going to jump on into part of the solo from here. Okay, so let's just start with that part. Now, as you saw right there, we have this key change right here. We transition to the key of B minor, denoted by these two sharps right here versus the four sharps that we had prior for C sharp minor. And one thing that I did, which I typically do, is on the bass line, and that's this section right here. This is all the bass line. I went ahead and I noted what the sort of implied chord would be off of the bass, and in this case it's a B minor, because as you can see, the vast majority of these notes, and remember this is the bass clef right here, all these notes, the vast majority of them, not every single one but most, are a B note themselves. And there's no rhythm guitars here, it's just the bass and the lead guitar. So I'm interpreting this whole section as B minor. Now, one thing that I've done in addition to that is also in commonplace, write down the extensions of what is going on top of the implied chord. But within that, there's another way to look at things too when it comes to this. You can also look at lead lines from a standpoint of, if we're going to try to figure out or try to interpret what chords might be implied by the lead lines themselves and stacked on top of the lower implied chord, and by that I mean the implied chord implied by the bass, we can sometimes get a greater understanding of what's going on. So for example, in this case right here, we have the bass guitar, and that's implying a B minor. I'm viewing that as a B minor because there's just a ton of B's up in here. We also can look at the lead guitar, and that's shown right here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see both at the same time, and the tab. And that B minor is implied right here. And I'm implying that in both sections, in both the bass and the lead guitar, they are going for a B minor for the simple fact that we are essentially outlining a B arpeggio with these three notes, as well as having the fifth right here as shown of B minor. And that right there would be an F. So we essentially have the B. We then on top of that have the D, and then the F right here, and that also as well would be shown with the F right here in this section, and that D would actually be a D sharp. And so basically from that we can say both parts of this section, both the bass and the lead guitar, are implying a B minor. Now, and that's kind of obvious, like, oh, they're both implying a B. It's obviously a B minor here. Okay. So the interesting thing that when this, from a theoretical standpoint, will come up in just a second when we move over here to this section. Okay, so just those little bits right there, you know, and it sounds very unified, it sounds very nice, but if we really wanted to get into the micro level of things, because all this stuff right here is very micro level, you know, like looking at the general implied B minor by the bass line, that's kind of a more macro level way to look at things, but looking at these isolated instances here of what the lead guitar doing is a lot more micro level. And if we wanted to look at that micro level and say in the second section right here, which sounds basically like this, that gives us a lot more of a thing to look at here in the standpoint of what chord is being implied, because even though there's a B minor going on underneath everything, there is also what is essentially an A being applied by the arpeggiation of the lead guitar. And we can denote that because, and I'm gonna get way in here to show y'all, we have what is essentially an A right here, a C sharp right here, and then E right here in this section. And then what do we have right down here as well? Well, we have another E there. So what that does is that, in a manner of speaking, outlines an inverted chord, essentially. It almost, like these four notes right here almost show a chord in a second inversion, actually, because the fifth is all the way on the bottom. And again, that fifth in this case being that E, which is right here. So again, it's a very, very micro level way to look at things, but the lesson to be drawn from this is that not only when you're writing a solo can you look at creating a lead line based off of what the bass or the rhythm guitar, the lower notes are doing themselves, you can also think on top of that, you know what happens if I take, how does it sound if I take this, you know, chord right here, this B implied chord, and play an A over top of it? What happens if I play, we'll see in a second, a G over top of it? You know what I'm saying? What happens, how does it sound when I play these different chords from the scale over top whatever the underlying implied chord is? It's a really unique way to open yourself up to lots and lots of different creative possibilities. And even though this isn't terribly complicated, we're just playing one chord over another in terms of arpeggiation and implication, it still is a great, awesome tool to think about. Like if you hit a wall in a solo, go ahead and start trying some of this stuff. Maybe you'll get some unique sounds you weren't able to ascertain before, and that can always sound really cool. So let's go ahead and go on. I'm going to play this thing from the top. So we have what is essentially the exact same setup right here. We now have a G. So we have the G, we have the B right here, and then we have the D right here, forming a G major chord. And then just like prior, we actually have the fifth of the G on the bottom again as well at that D right here. So basically, to get us through, what is it? Is it a full 8 measures? 1, 2, 3... Yeah, to get us through about 6 measures or so, from here to here, we're using this technique of playing chords, triads essentially, over top of a implied B minor chord. Different ones too. We start off with the B minor in unison with what the bass is doing. We then change that up to the, what would be of this key, the flat 7, and then what also would be of this key, the flat 6 with the G. So some good stuff right there. You know, and I just thought you'd also notate it out here if you're interested in it, what the actual extensions of the B minor implied chord would be, that based off of each note they're playing right here. So you can see this A, for example, right here is the flat 7 of B minor, obviously, and this G right here is the flat 6 of B minor once again. So just a few different ways to look at it, but again, the takeaway here is if you want to mix stuff up, try playing some different chords over top of whatever your implied chord is. You know, you can get some pretty cool results with it. So good stuff right there. I'm gonna go ahead and play this from start to finish, and let's get into the next section. Okay, so we have this really cool kind of shred action going on here. Now, once again, what I did was for this section, and again, this entire part right here, I didn't carry out the bars and everything, but this entire section up to here is B minor. All right, so I'm gonna zoom way out. That's all a B minor right there. So keep that in mind. Everything kind of has a B minor chord going on underneath it. But we are keeping on with the idea of also extracting chords from what the lead guitar is doing, from what the solo guitar is doing. So if you look at that, you can see that after this last little arpeggiated section, We have this cool kind of little shred line they do there. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening here. So what goes down? I'm going to interpret this best I can, because there are a couple different ways to look at this, obviously, but I think there is a little bit of demonstrability to be drawn from it too. So if you look right here, starting about in this section to here or so, I would interpret this entire bit as G major 7, okay? Now, my reasoning for doing that is, first of all, you have a G right here, so that's, you know, kind of a nice indicator. Secondly, you can tell a few things right off the bat. Now let's skip this interval to this interval right here for a second. What do you have from right here to here to here? You have the line ascending in thirds, okay? Those notes right there form a G major 7. That G major 7 is derived from these notes, this G, this B, this D, and this F sharp right here give us the G major 7. And then there's a little bit of a slur up to this note, and what is that? Well, that's a G as well. So essentially we ascend all the way up to the G, from G to G, using not just the triad, but also the major 7, and then stop at the G, and then do a little more movement over here I'll talk about in a second. You might say, well, what's this note right here then in that case? Well, from the standpoint of viewing this pinpointed section, just this line, as a G major 7, this would be the 5th, okay? So still within the G major 7. You can see right down here, this note, if you were going to build a triad lower down, this would be your G right here, and that's where the little box is. It's right here in this section. Hopefully you can see that. If you were going to build a triad off of there, this would be your 1, this would be your 3, and this would be your 5. But instead of doing that, what they do is they start the shred on the 5 right here, jump up to the 1, which is the G, then to the 3rd, then to the 5th, then to the 7th, then back to the 1, an octave higher than the first time they played the 1. So G major 7 starting from the 5th, a little bit of a pseudo kind of a second inversion sort of shred line again, if you would, just like we saw prior. We're then going to move over a touch, and hopefully it doesn't jump too far. There we go. So then what happens is we get up to here, so that's G now. We have a little more G chord right here, G major 7. So what else is going on here? Well, we're at the G. We now go back down to the 7, then we go back down to the 5, and then back to the 7 for a final time. So all of that stuff being considered, about roughly up to that point, I consider that a G major 7 chord. Now, directly after that, and again, this is all very open to interpretation, but like what I would then derive from this whole movement is that starting about here, maybe here, is a B minor 7. Now, why do I say that? Well, first of all, I look at the highest note here, where there is a movement of only a major 2 from here to here. This note right here is also a B. And what can we think of this? Well, we can think of this as, once again, a 7, a flat 7 in this case, and doing essentially a movement from the 1 to the 7 to the 5 to the 3 right here. Because remember, the B is just right here. Again, if hopefully you can see that's where the yellow box is. It's where my cursor is going back and forth. That would be the B right there. So we essentially have this B going down to this A, going down to this F sharp right here, then going down to this D, that being the 3rd, the flat 3 rather, of the B minor 7 chord. And then I say that carries all the way through. B minor 7 carries all the way through, because what do we do then? After this, we go back up to the 5th, and then there is something that deviates from the strict B minor 7 chord right here. There is a flat 6, and again, that's if we're interpreting this from the B minor 7 chord. There is a flat 6 noted right here, and that flat 6 right there would be the F sharp. That's not in the B minor chord, B minor 7 chord. But directly after that, you get back down to the 5, back down to the 3, to the flat 3 rather, and then you finally get down to the 1. And then what do? Instead of descending another 3rd, you descend a perfect 4th, which gets you back to the 5. This right here note is also the 5 of B minor 7. Then you move further down to the flat 3, back to the 1, because this right here is a B right there. And then you move back down even lower, back to the flat, or rather to the 5. This right here would be the 5. And then there's a couple more movements. The line ends right here. This is where a new thing comes up. You then just have a fairly straightforward movement where you go from B to D to F sharp, all the way up to A, which is again a little bit different and everything. There is not perfectly fitting within it or anything like that, but it is kind of there, and it does sort of follow the pattern that we've established. And then moving back down, what would be the fifth of B minor 7. So a lot of stuff to take care of. You know, how do we apply? How do we sum all this up and apply it and everything? Well, the idea is this. You can have a really cool and very intricate, like it sounds technical, it sounds tight, it all sounds very, very good. You can come up with a lot of fast and quick stuff to get you through measures using just arpeggiations and one chord. All right, because I mean, look at how much real estate we took up on the staff just out of that. That got us 2 full measures of a really cool, really awesome, and unique and rhythmically interesting shred right here. So you can do a lot of stuff even with one singular chord. And remember, all of this is going on while the bass line is implying nothing but a B minor chord. So never discount how much mileage you can get out of a single chord if you use it right. So good stuff right here. Let's see. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on here. So we now, at this section of the solo, again, very, very good idea. We now get into the sort of second part of the solo, which modulates back to C minor as denoted by the 4 sharps right here. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on here. And I'm going to go ahead and play it a few measures back from before the shred, then we'll get into C minor, C sharp minor rather. All right, so we're going to look at this C sharp minor section right here. Let's go ahead and start just looking at some of this first shred right here. In fact, we'll start with this section because it changes up in the very next measure. So I'm just going to play it really quick. Okay, so that little bit right there, again in C sharp minor, is essentially just moving through a C sharp add, a C sharp minor add 4, and look, mad 4 is what that looks like, but it's an add 4. The reason for me putting that is that this section of the song uses all of the chord tones of C sharp minor, but interjects a 4 in there, and it's a little bit interesting. We'll see probably why they did that specifically in a second as well. So it's just a little bit of an arpeggiation, a little bit of a shred. You have some intervals right next to each other right here, giving you the 4 sound, but you have a lot of kind of arpeggiation and sweeping. It's a very cool line. You have a little bit of some instances where the apex note, the sort of highest note on the line, is a flat 3. You have other points where it's a sharp 4, or rather just a regular 4. And most of the time, if not every time, it looks like the lowest note is a 4. So basically just picking a point that you start with and keeping that consistent, a lowest point that is, and then kind of alternating how high you shred up. Do you shred up to the 4 or do you shred up to the flat 3? Just alternating a little thing like that can really, really add some good variation and make a solo sound like it's moving, even though with every ascension, you're only changing one note. And by ascension, I mean moving up and down to here, ascending to here, that's the flat 3, going down and ascending to here, that's the flat 4. That gives you a lot of movement, and it's a really good idea to keep the listener engaged even within a quick measure. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the next measure, and I'm going to play from this measure right here and play to the next measure. So we're going to hear 2 measures. Okay. So just, again, really, really quick, but to show what's kind of happening there, and again, we're all implying a C sharp minor here based on the bass, all right? They are adding a sharp 4 in here. Now you might say, oh, sharp 4, that's not in like the Aeolian mode. That's not in a minor scale, okay? It's not. What that is the blues note, is the way that I've always heard it referred to as. It's the note you add to a minor scale to make it sound like minor blues. So we're sort of implying some minor blues action in here. But remember, we're adding the note. So we're not replacing the 4 with the sharp 4. We're adding a sharp 4 alongside the 4. So what we end up having here are these licks that essentially are chromatic movements down in 3 notes, chromatic movements moving from the 5 to the sharp 4 to the 4 right here. We're interjecting that natural G up in there along with the G flat, which is shown right here, or in our case, actually it'd be a G sharp. And along with the flat 3 and the 1, still essentially just outlining a C sharp minor chord, but now it's an add 4. And this nomenclature might not be 100% right. I tried to get it as, close as possible, but interjecting an add 4 and adding a sharp 4 as well simultaneously, really giving us a blues sound and really kind of just, again, creating a unique and interesting sound that catches your ears by just adding a single note and essentially changing up the scale to be a blues minor scale instead of just a typical minor scale. Great technique, used very, very quickly, but that's the kind of stuff you need to be thinking about utilizing to make stuff sound interesting and exciting and cool. So let's go ahead and move on from here. All right, so this very next section, as you can see right here, I interpreted this bit as C sharp minor 7 add 4. There is a single sharp 4 in here, so you still kind of get that blues sound, but overwhelmingly, we've now transitioned from having a sharp 4 and an add 4 in there into what is basically adding a 7 in there. So now we have a 1, a 4, a flat 3, as can be seen right here. Let me zoom in a little bit. And a sharp 4 in this one instance, but that's just a single instance, so whatever. And some flat 7s going on here. So that section goes. You kind of hold it here for a second. The tab implies a pinch harmonic and everything like that. Not sure if that's quite like that in the actual song, but you play it. Then you have this kind of nice ascending line. All right, so and then you ascend, and you ascend from the flat 7 to the 1. Again, a great thing to kind of add pull in the song, and you're probably already doing this when you're writing songs just because it sounds good and sounds so natural. I mean, it's done all the time. To give a little bit of pull to your song, if you're going to go to the 1 chord, in this case, it'd be a C sharp minor would be the 1 chord. Go ahead and just ascend up there to do it, all right? Like right here, go ahead and for the very first eighth note in this case, go ahead and start that on the flat 7, then move up to it. Okay, it just gives you a little bit more movement, keeps things a little more exciting and interesting. So good move right here. Then it just ascends throughout the chord, flat 3. But once again, adding in that 4. So we go to a 4. Again, this whole section is rife with 4s, add 4s. So, just adding that to it, adding a single extension to your solo throughout several measures in a variety of ways as seen, say here, right here, or here, and adding the sharp 4 in addition to that regular 4. Or even like you see here where you have just a whole line that kind of, move on over, you have a whole line that kind of is taken up by 4s as well. Another good idea to make a solo sound interesting while at the same time sounding cohesive. You don't have to sacrifice cohesion for interestingness and adding extensions if you do it the right way. And this is a great example of that. Essentially just kind of pulling you through the implied chord, the C sharp minor, all the way up as you go, also utilizing the flat 4, or rather the natural 4. So this 4 has been a prominent occurrence in this part of the solo all the way through. So always a good thing to keep in mind. You can keep a song sounding cohesive and unified by playing like the notes within the implied chord implied by the bass and rhythm guitars, while at the same time adding a little bit of interest and intrigue to what you're doing by putting in that 4, in this case anyways, that 4 as well, but it could work for other extensions too. So good stuff right here. It continues on. Finishing out on the 1 right here, because this is a C sharp itself, then finally doing a final arpeggiation, bending back to the 1. And we see right here, and let's actually listen to that one more time because that was kind of quick. And there you go. So yeah, bending very cleanly from the, or rather shredding very cleanly from the 1 to the flat 3 and just moving up, moving all the way up. Once again, hitting that 4, but adding and bending to that 5 in there, going back to the flat 3, and then sort of bending up to the 1. So that's the solo to Ego by Omnium Gatherum, right? So what are the main takeaways? Well, first of all, you can have a lot of interesting stuff transpiring in the solo, even when you are mostly staying just like on the 1, on the minor chord of whatever you're playing. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, utilize key changes if you'd like. Utilizing key changes, and we talked about this in the song at large, is a great way to essentially be able to play the same thing over and over again, but simultaneously be be able to add interest and movement to what you're doing, so things aren't sounding so completely and totally just samey and such like that. So very, very good tactic right there. Something else you can do along with that is to add extensions, and extensions to your soloing in this case. You could add it to the rhythm too, that always works good. But to your soloing in this case, for example, the vast majority of this song particularly, we saw an abundant use of the 4, okay, of the 4th of C sharp minor in this case here, after the key change to C sharp minor. We also saw a utilization of the blues scale, which from the minor perspective, you add a sharp 4, play the regular 4, and play the 5, and you have the blues scale right there. So a lot of use of 4ths in this. Throughout the entire solo, we obviously saw uses of flat 7s. Flat 7s are another great thing. They are the most, I suppose, commonplace sounding extension, you might say. That extension sounds good in lots of cases, and it all fits nicely within the triad. It's a very common extension to use. So if you're trying to like work your way or solo your way up through something and you feel like a triad just isn't quite doing it, try adding that 7. In this case, it's a flat 7. If you're playing a major chord, it'd be a natural 7. Go ahead and try to add that in. That might end up giving you exactly what you're looking for depending on your situation. So very, very good solo. Very, very simple and rather short solo compared to some other solos that we've tackled here, but still nonetheless full of good information and good techniques for us to utilize when we're writing our own songs. So overall, I'd say a pretty good deal right here. Guys, if you like this video, I appreciate you checking it out. If you could for me, I would really, really like it if you could check out my new song called Telestial Fray. It's on Spotify right now. You can find it by typing in Spike Signal on Spotify or Apple Music, just like you see it here on YouTube. And let me know what you think about it, man. If you like it, I'd really appreciate hearing about it. Or if you don't like it, you can tell me how it sucks. That's cool too, man. If you want to see more stuff like this, man, I got more videos coming out all the time, and you can keep it right here at the Spike Signal. Thank you.